All right, chat. Let's watch this Kyrsten Sinema thing, because I think this is really the most important part of our politics today. Is the center is blatantly anti-democratic, and it makes sense. If you're a neoliberal, you believe in the meritocracy of the market, right? You don't believe in democracy. You don't believe in popular consent. You don't believe in the wisdom of the lower class, right? You think that if you're poor there because you deserve to be poor. If you're rich because you deserve to be rich, and you are wiser, and so we should obviously listen to you more. That's the kind of the assumption that goes into neoliberalism, is that the market outcomes are in a sense meritocratic, just. What are the key factors in your opinion that are present / heavily affect the popularity of fascist ideology? I think it's a crisis of capitalism. So there is declining standard of living among the vast majority of people, seeing high concentration of wealth and power. You have some various catalyzing crises that provide scapegoats, and you have this failure and exhaustion of the left / center left. Like, they're not offering a compelling alternative to the status quo. Those are the factors that I think lead to the rise of a fascist ideology. Okay, let's watch Kyrsten Sinema, because she is fucking stupid.
Here's Kyrsten Sinema talking about how she and Mitch McConnell are best friends and really understand each other. I have like visions of them going to Hot Topic and braiding each other's hair, circulating in my mind, speaking at the McConnell Center and making it clear exactly who she serves.
So, hi, Senator Sinema. Thank you for being here with us today. My name is Madeline, and I'm a staff member with the McConnell Center, and I'll now take us into the Q&A portion. First, you touched on this in your talk, but can you expound on why you hold such support for the filibuster, especially when many others in your party have opposing views?
That's such a great question, Madeline. You know, Senator McConnell mentioned this in his opening remarks, and I mentioned it in my remarks as well. The danger of eliminating the 60-vote threshold is that the Senate becomes the House. And I remind everyone, I left the House and ran for the Senate for a reason.
The Senate becomes the House. Oh, I'm sorry. Does the Senate suddenly have proportional representation based on population? It's already an anti-democratic institution that gives way more weight to smaller states. So you already have to have a supermajority to pass anything. At least if you're a Democrat. Democrats require a supermajority in order to pass anything, meaning the population of people that they represent that are Democratic senators is tens of millions more than the population represented by Republican senators. So already, to get something passed out of the Senate, even with a 51 vote threshold, you are talking, if it's a left-leaning policy, you need tens of millions of more people to have voted for you. Jesus Christ.
Pause it. Okay, this is very important to understand. The House has its problems. The House has birthed things like the Freedom Caucus, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert. They're all members of the House. But the House is a lot more of a direct and also I should say the seats that comprise the House are subject to a lot of gerrymandering and are not necessarily representative of the individual communities that they're supposed to serve. It's a hell of a lot more democratic and representative than the Senate, where we have a 50-50 split, 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans. The 50 Democrats represent 40 million more Americans than the 50 Republicans because, you know, Montana gets 2 Senate seats, so does California, for example. So and plus, on top of it, it serves as a hamstring on the more democratic representation of the House because of the filibuster, which is only circumvented for budgetary purposes and through reconciliation. The filibuster ends a great...
The downfall of democracy won't because of the far right. It'll because the demon rats siding with capital on the far right. They already have. The center of the Democratic Party has already sided with fascism. The question is whether enough of if the Democrats are going to have a gravity-defying miracle midterm that puts in a couple extra people that aren't completely fucking stupid, and at the very last second pass a bunch of laws, which may or may not be enough, right? Like, but that's our hope. This is our best path. Our best path is hoping that the Democrats have a gravity-defying election, get a few more people into the House and Senate, and then pass some shit that hopefully gets implemented by 2024. So like 8 things have to go right for this country not to fucking fall apart.
Great majority.
It's worth remembering the principles on which the country was founded. Now, the United States is an unusual country. Most countries kind of grew out of existing institutions. So in Europe, for example, you know, the systems that developed grew out of the feudal system and the church and all kind of other stuff that stayed around with its lingering effects. And incidentally, one of the reasons why Europe has support systems and welfare systems and so on is because of the deeply reactionary character of the institutions that remained, like the feudal system and the church. Remember, they were pre-capitalist, and they were based on the idea that people had a right to live, maybe a rotten place, but some place. They had a place in society, and they deserved it, and they had to be maintained there. And that's a pre-capitalist idea. In fact, what's now called neoliberal economics, really classical economics, is based on the principle that people don't have a right to live. You go back to the origins, you know, David Ricardo and Malthus and those guys. Their big point was to try to convince people that you do not have a right to live. You hurt the poor by helping them. The idea that you have a right to live is just a mistake. It has to be beaten out of people's minds. The only right that you have is whatever rights you get on the labor market. If you can get enough to survive on the labor market, fine. If not, as they put it, go somewhere else. You have no right to be here. Well, you know, back in the 1820s when they were talking about this stuff, you could go somewhere else. Like you could go to places like this where, you know, the land was being cleared of the plague that was in the way, and as soon as you exterminated those people and kicked them out, then you had a place to go. Same with Australia. Well, now you don't have a place to go anymore, but you still don't have a right to live. It's important to recognize that. And you go somewhere else, and maybe there'll be jail or, you know, something, but anyhow, you have no right to live. Well, these pre-capitalist ideas, which you get in people like Adam Smith and so on, they remained in elsewhere. And they're part of the basis for the kinds of support systems that we don't have. But the United States was different. It was created. You know, it's kind of like a blank slate. You know, it's the one country that was almost constructed from almost nothing. And we know how it was constructed, and it's quite interesting. You go back to the Constitutional Convention, where the dominant voice was James Madison, the main framer of the Constitution. And this does not come out very clearly in the stuff that you read in college, like the Federalist Papers, which was presented for the public, so it's kind of watered down. But if you go back to the Constitutional Convention debates, they're very clear. Madison makes clear that the prime responsibility of government and the framework of the new government that's being established, the prime responsibility of government, he says, is to protect the minority of the opulent against the majority. That's the prime responsibility.
The prime responsibility is to protect the minority of the opulent against the majority.
Then there's secondary things. But you've got to protect the minority, the opulent, against the majority. Madison warned of what he called the danger of the leveling spirit among the, I'm quoting now, among the growing numbers of people who labor under all the hardships of life and secretly sigh for a more equal distribution of its blessings. Now that's a big danger, and if you let that danger be realized in the new system, it's going to threaten the minority of the opulent, and they have to be protected. So therefore, democracy is unacceptable. That was the primary principle on which the Constitution was designed and on which the system was designed, and very explicit. Democracy is unacceptable because of this leveling spirit among the people who labor under all the hardships of life and sigh for a more equal distribution of its blessings. And if you give them a chance to do anything about it, you're going to threaten the minority of the opulent. And he used England as that was the obvious example. That was the model for everyone. He said in England, if they allowed democracy, then people would, the mass of the population would vote for what we now call agrarian reform. That is, they would call for breaking up the big landed estates, and it would threaten the minority, the opulent, and obviously that's an intolerable idea. So therefore, we got to make sure that there's no democratic system. And Madison totally carried the day. The only dissenting voice in the Constitutional Convention was James Wilson, and he was smashed. Jefferson wasn't part of this, remember. He was a real Democrat, so he was out of the whole planning. And that's the way the system was designed. It was very carefully designed to satisfy the Madisonian principle that wealth must rule, because, as he put it, the wealthy are a better class of men, and therefore they must rule, and beside they own the country anyhow, so therefore they have a responsibility and a right, and the minority, the opulent, must be protected. All of this is clear, explicit, and interestingly, it doesn't change. So you get the same view when you get to, say, Wilsonian intellectuals in the modern period, people like, say, Walter Lippmann and Harold Lasswell and others who explain, this is the left liberals now, who explain that in a democracy, the population, what Lippmann calls the ignorant and meddlesome outsiders, the general population have to be kept from interfering. They can be spectators but not participants, because if they're participants, they might threaten the minority, the opulent, who have to be protected. That's a position that goes right up till the present. However, to make it much clearer, there's another issue. Madison himself was a pre-capitalist figure. He had roots in the Enlightenment, and his idea was that the wealthy, the better class of men who had to rule under the constitutional system would be benevolent aristocrats. They would be nice gentlemen who read, the classics and behave like Roman gentlemen and would act, in a civilized fashion. He discovered in a couple of years that that wasn't true. And within about 10 years after the Constitution was put in place, he saw what was happening, and he denounced what he called the daring depravity of the times, as the rising business classes use government power for their own ends, not for the benefit of the population. They become, as he put it, the tools and tyrants of government. It's tools because they benefit from its largesses, and tyrants because they overwhelm it with their powers and combinations. That's a very accurate description of the system then and the system today. That's what the wealthy classes are, the tools and tyrants of government. They overwhelm it and benefit from it. They use it to protect them from market discipline, which of course they impose on others, and they want to make sure that it's in their hands, and it is not in the manner of enlightened gentlemen of the kind that Madison had in mind. Rather, it's the daring depravity of the times. Well, Madison, again, these are all things you don't study in elementary school where they would be taught in a free society, but these are the founding principles of the country. And although things have changed a lot in the last 200 years, as a description, Madison's account of the daring depravity of the times in the 1790s is not very far from correct now.
Yeah, and so obviously the Senate and our institutions are not democratic, and that is the crisis. It's important to point that out. Like, it's not that we don't have the vast majority of people in this country who want objectively better policies, right? Because there is social science, there is comparative politics. We have studied what policies are necessary for a better society. We know what they are. And the United States of America does not implement those policies, not because of a lack of popular will, not because of a lack of evidence, but because those in a position of power, those who are incumbents, are profiting from the inequalities, are profiting from the suboptimal policy set. And so they prevent any kind of democratic will. They prevent that democratic will from being realized. They frustrate any attempts to change the system. And that is building up pressure. There's building up pressure from the left and the right. And the question is, who will burst through fourth? Who will become the first to grab the reins of power and remake the system in their own image? Will it be the left or the far right? And right now, if you had to bet on a horse, the far right has the inside lane, the inside line
of the legislation coming out of the House, because it's meant to be there as a gatekeeper for actual representative democracy. And that is what she's lauding here.
Especially when many others in your party have opposing views.
That's such a great question, Madeline. You know, Senator McConnell mentioned this in his opening remarks, and I mentioned it in my remarks as well. The danger of eliminating the 60-vote threshold is that the Senate becomes the House. And I remind everyone, I left the House and ran for the Senate for a reason.
It was less
I remember
democratic.
my early years. I served for 6 years in the House of Representatives. And I remember being so frustrated during those 6 years because it felt like every time there was a big bipartisan solution that needed to happen, the Senate just kind of came up with a solution and then gave it to the House and we just ate it. And that's why I ran for the Senate.
Okay, so there you go.
Wait a second.
She makes it clear there, and by the way, she barely ever speaks publicly, so this is good that we have this sound. Like, she didn't like that the House of Representatives was more democratic, and she liked that the Senate came up with more corporate-friendly legislation that would be sent back to the House. And so she said, I need to be a part of that. I need to be central in that effort. And she also just like completely, in that time period, rebranded herself as a politician from like more just kind of girl boss, stand your Democrat to as corporate and centrist as you possibly could. This is the former member of the Green Party that's speaking right now.
Yeah, I mean, she oddly, like, that's a problem I have with the House too, is that it's too deferential to the Senate.
Right.
Like,
they should flex more.
I don't know how she cited that as like, I'm a little bit confused by that. Like, the problem with the House is that, like, often it can just be used for grandstanding because they know that the Senate is there to stop anything.
No, but she's speaking about that at like she's speaking about the Senate and the legislation that comes out of it as something that she wishes the House would cook up.
Right.
Because they're the ones really
crap.
getting things done, which is such reverse logic. The reason that the House has to kind of be more deferential to the Senate is because of the filibuster.
Right.
The Senate has the ability to kill whatever comes out of the House when they decide, and they check with their corporate donors first and they say, is this going to be good or is this going to be bad? And that's the filtering system in the Senate.
Right. So when she says the Senate makes the House eat it, she thinks that's good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So she's like, and I want it to be more a part of the,
that's the 21 months.
in the central part of the power structure as it being part of the Senate. So just like speaking to her psychology, most of us would say that's a bad thing, but for her it's a good thing. And for the audience at the McConnell Center, I'd imagine it is too.
They're doing the work. The reality is that if you were to eliminate the 60-vote threshold in the Senate would become like the House, smaller, older, but basically like the House. And the trouble with that is that, you know, the House, with elections every 2 years, representing a smaller group of voters by each House, they really represent the passions of the moment in the political spectrum. So as you all know, control changes between the House and the Senate every couple of years. It's likely to change again in just a few weeks, right? And so when the House passes...
You're supposed to be against that. You're a Democrat. I mean, like, honest to God. Like, she really is the most mask-off politician in America today because she got there because a bunch of progressive people, left-wing people, labor unions, etc., unified behind her, put their political capital to work and dragged her across the finish line. And she doesn't even want her own side to win. I think she may be one of the dumbest politicians in history and the best example of hubris I've ever seen. She needs to go.
This legislation, it represents that kind of rapidly shifting... Everything's fine, right? Great.
No.
Not everyone likes me, so just check it, you know?
Yeah, you fucking suck.
Hi.
So the House passes legislation that represents the passions of the moment. And that's what it was designed to do when our forefathers created the House. They wanted a body that represented the passions of Americans at the moment. But they tend to be a little bit over eager. So when Republicans...
They want to get rid of slavery.
They pass a crazy legislation. And when the Democrats are in control, they pass...
I mean, like, that's an important thing. This babble, it's important that you not connect it with any historical reality. That's one of the things that right-wingers do. Does this sound appealing to you? Does this sound intelligent to you? Be honest. Like, oh, okay, you want to cool the passions of the moment, right? Does that sound like a good argument to you? Now, maybe it could be. Maybe it could be. You can imagine something where bad people get elected in the House and you don't want it to pass, right? You want to cool the passions of the moment. But what does that actually mean in history? What are the passions of the moment? Women's suffrage, civil rights acts, taxing the rich, the New Deal. What the fuck are you talking about? And what did the Senate protect? Slavery, segregation, Jim Crow, corporations and the mega rich, environmental destruction. What did the Senate protect exactly? What passions were cooled? Like, there's legitimately no argument that's based in reality that defends this shit. One love, one being. Thank you for the tier 1.
That's a little bit of crazy legislation. And the job of the Senate
Crazy.
is to cool that passion. You know, there's a saying that the House is the cup of hot tea, and the Senate is the saucer in which you cool that tea. The Senate was designed to be a place that moves slowly.
Does she not know how tea works? What, she thinks you dump tea onto the saucer? This sounds like somebody saying that who doesn't know what tea is. Who said this? The Senate is the saucer, cooling saucer. She's too stupid. George Washington is said to have told Jefferson that the framers had created the Senate to cool House legislation, just as a saucer was used to cool hot tea. When it comes to confirming judges and executive nominees, it's a simple majority threshold to cut off debate. When it comes to major legislation, it relies on the expedited procedures called the Budget Reconciliation Act.
Down those passions, to think more strategically.
But in 2017, in full control of Congress and the White House, and with a majority vote needed to finally repeal the ACA, the Republican Senate could not muster a majority. Republican Senators Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, and John McCain knew their vote would actually have consequences. They voted no. The repeal effort died. It turns out that when the votes count, the tea gets pretty cool.
Strategically and long term about the legislation before us.
Except that's not what happens. You know, one of the things that's really interesting about people like Kyrsten Sinema is she's a fucking lying sack of shit. The Senate is not passing prudent legislation. It's passing garbage legislation that will not achieve even these blinkered expectations that it says are its intent. This is just stupid.
And most importantly, it was designed to require comity, to require people to compromise and work.
Except it doesn't. Except it doesn't. Now it's just filibuster everything. Now it's just block everything the other party does. Now it's only pass stuff through reconciliation. We're a government of reconciliation and executive order. Why? And that's true of whether Republicans or Democrats are in power. Because this doesn't do that.
Together, so the legislation we pass represents the viewpoints of a broad spectrum of the country,
but
not just the passion.
The filibuster means you just table it and don't deal with it, right? Like if you actually had a House that was active and got rid of the filibuster, all of a sudden senators would need to get off their ass and start actually figuring out how we're going to pass something. Or like actually work together because this stuff is going to go pass because we can't rely on 60, the need for 60 to stop it. So
notice how her perception of like the democratic will of the people is the passions of the public. You know, the House they get elected every 2 years, so they have to go back to their constituents and say, this is what I've done for you, and that's too much of the you're too directly connected to the will of the people there and their passions. Like people like her have a really condescending view of the American public. They think that they're a problem as opposed to some the people that where you derive your power from, which is essentially what representative democracy is supposed to be.
It is, as Chomsky said, the minority of the opulent. That's what the Senate is there to protect. And centrists are fascists. That's it. Centrists are light fascists. conservatives are active participants in the fascist state. Like, duh. I mean, just like, come on, man. It's either us, the elite, or anarchy, the lib version of it. Incredible. And it's funny because the states that have the most effective democracies are the ones that get better outcomes.
Supposed to be. She is anti-democratic, and that is epitomized by her support of the filibuster.
Yeah, I mean, the Senate is just literally a body for aristocrats. Like, that's what it, like, literally we didn't have we weren't even able to vote for them for the longest time because that was supposed to just be, and it is literally just against the people. We talk about passions. That means people saying, like, we should have health care.
Activists.
Yeah, exactly.
Or we should have, civil rights.
No, that doesn't mean activists. That means the majority of voters in the election. That means that what passions means is everybody got, tens of millions of people got together, cast a vote for a politician over years of campaigning, and their platform, that's passions. It's not some riotous mob on the street bashing in a plate glass window. It is the sober reality of years-long campaigns. It's white papers and frustrating that, preventing democratic change. That's what the passions are.
Vote, even if we're black.
And like the forefathers that wanted that Senate, like, were wanted because they wanted to make sure, literally, you could not even talk about slavery in the Senate in like the 1830s. It took like one of the Quincy Adams, I think it was, finally like challenged the gag rule, but the Senate was there to stop that sort of thing and saying, like, hey, if anybody says, like a lot of people were in the first like 25 years of the American Republic, saying, hey, we should maybe do something about slavery because it's kind of inconsistent. You couldn't talk about that in the Senate that Kyrsten Sinema loves so much.
Yeah, and when she says that what she and McConnell have in common is a respect for the Senate as an institution, that means that you don't respect the people, and you also have respect for a slowing agent on activism that brings justice and equality for wider swaths of people. The institution that you respect is one that slows progress and hurts people actively through austerity measures and through holding back representative direct democracy. There's nothing laudable about respecting the Senate as an institution. The Senate, as I've said, should go the way of the House of Lords in the United Kingdom, and should be a ceremonial body that does not actually have a tremendous effect on legislation in the way that it does now. Because she's right, the Senate wields more power than the House. And there's something that's fundamentally wrong with that.
That's a choice by the powerful, yeah.
And the filibuster, when she has reverence for it, as we've said, is a relic of Jim Crow. So, people have a hard time understanding that. But when she talks about how the House is more, it's more at the will of the passions of the people, what she's referencing there is like civil rights activists who were able to get more of a toehold in the House and were able to get more representation in the House of Representatives than they were in the Senate, and who was trying to kill civil rights legislation through the use of a filibuster, which is the same way and the same function that it serves today, which is that if you can't get the 60 vote threshold, you're not going to be able to pass dick. You can't pass anything. And the stuff that is widely popular, the stuff that would actually alleviate some suffering in this country, has to go through some convoluted process, and a parliamentarian has to say, okay, all right, we can have a federal minimum wage that isn't a poverty wage, and she has reverence for that. Like, people like her who ascribe artificial morality to process and to tradition, stripping that process and tradition of the context in which it exists, are actually just like vile people, because all you're in favor of is just pageantry. There's nothing moral about that. Nothing at all. It's just that you're a part of a system and you're in favor of, I don't know, aesthetics or procedure. What actually matters and what you're actually supposed to stand for are values and progressing society in a way that makes it more equitable for people. So there's nothing moral about supporting institutions as institutions if the value of those institutions is largely harmful to people. So,
and I want to say something here. People don't give a shit about these institutions. If you're a freak who likes the mace of the house, or you think the Senate is some sort of reverential institution, January 6th should have at least proven one thing to everybody. Nobody fucking cares about these worthless institutions. And if conditions get bad enough in this country, we will both, Democrats, Republicans, left, right, will all come together to smear shit on George Washington's face. No one gives a fuck. Those institutions remain as long as they're able to hold on to power. The moment our standard of living declines to a sufficient degree, those institutions go into the fucking shredder. Rightfully, the dead should not rule the living. And if you want to talk about how ineffective these institutions are, I want to show you something incredible.
Damn. Oh, wait. Let's pull up her approval ratings, because she says a lot of people hate her. What the fuck is her constituency? She's got nobody who actually backs her. And I'm hoping that people in Arizona are looking at these numbers and saying this woman is prime for a primary challenge. Her numbers are dismal. Bradley's pulling this up here. Here we go.
Yeah, and we've looked at this poll before. Kyrsten Sinema is unpopular among every possible demographic. All voters, young voters, older voters, Democrats, independents, Republicans, women, men. She's unified the country in hatred of her. Hispanic voters, white voters, college graduates, non-college graduates, white people, Hispanic people, you name it. Everyone hates her.
Okay, all likely voters. And this is Arizona in particular, only a 37% favorability rating, 54% unfavorable. How about in the Democratic primary? 37. That's fairly. I thought that would be worse, actually. 37% favorable, 57% unfavorable. Independents as well, 41. She's underwater in all of these categories. If you look at the unfavorability, it's all above 50%, and that's pretty significant for a senator.
And this is from a recent Arizona poll commissioned by the AARP. That basically shows across her constituency, as you were asking, is people who don't like her. And I'm sure, given the disparity between the Arizona Senate nominees and gubernatorial nominees and Secretary of State nominees, there's not a whole lot of daylight between Arizona Republican voters and Democratic voters and independent voters. But they can all agree on one thing: that they fucking hate Kyrsten Sinema.
Yeah, well. We all can agree. I mean, her speech.
Republicans love Sinema in Arizona, but none of them would vote for her. They enjoy the fact she's fucking the Democrats, but they know she's not conservative, so they're not going to vote for her. They know she isn't actually a Republican, so they don't like her. So all she does is they enjoy the fact she's fucking over the Democrats, but that's not going to get her a single goddamn vote.
Speaking at the McConnell Center can't help her in a primary. Just put that image up of her. With her, doing the... I'm not saying you do it. I'm saying people in Arizona, when they're running against her, need to do it. Yikes. All right. What a terrible, terrible human being.
She's an she may be one of the dumbest motherfuckers. And she has a PhD, so she thinks she's smart. She thinks she's smart. Meanwhile, how are institutions handling... Oh, wait, the Senate can't even appoint an ambassador to Brazil? We also don't have a ambassador to guess where? Italy. Isn't that odd? Fascism growing in Italy. Fascism growing in Brazil. Yet we have no ambassador. Well. Oh, that's odd. That's weird. My sister thought Tyre was spelled Tyre, and she is a licensed psychologist. I mean, I mean, misspelling a word, you know. Are you watching the stream unsubbed? You're making income inequality worse. You are doing anti-praxis. We are the only Twitch stream that will not accept scam advertisers, and I will never fuck you over by selling you crap